All right, all right. Welcome to Geopolitics in Conflict. Breaking news. What's going on, Elizabeth?
Well, the question is, David, can a 50-minute phone call between Biden and Putin change the course of history? What do you
Um,
think?
oh my gosh, you're referring to the phone call that took place yesterday between POTUS, President
Mhm.
Biden, and Vladimir Putin, in which they had about 50-minute conversation addressing the issue of Ukraine.
Mhm.
Basically, they discussed the ongoing military tension, which we all know about, you know,
Right.
and the debate, trying to figure out a way of how this can be resolved. But here is what I found interesting, just for our viewers to know. What I found very interesting is this: that President Biden proposed a diplomatic path to
Mhm.
avoid any military escalation in Ukraine, and at the same time funneling weapons through a third party country.
That really is that.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
What do you call that? Hypocrisy? What do you call it?
Yes.
I don't know.
That's called hypocrisy, definitely. It's called showing one face to the world and doing something else entirely.
Exactly. And that becomes very questionable. And why is that questionable? As you will know more than anyone's knowing the area of the media part, that the media is saying one thing,
Right.
but the actions are saying something else. So, for example, the on both sides, the Kremlin and the White House, the Putin, for example, said that he was convinced that an effective dialogue based on mutual respect and a national
Yeah.
interest could be established between the two countries.
Well, and that's in his best interest. That, I mean, frankly, that's in everyone's best interest
Exactly.
for that to happen. But David, you talk all the time about NATO, and what really is NATO's purpose right now. And it's very much in Putin's best interest to say, look, here we are, we're cooperating,
Hmm.
and look how well we're cooperating. We want this to resolve, we want to de-escalate these issues, we want this to all sort of be okay. And that's in his best interest. It's in his best interest and Russia's best interest to not be looked at as an enemy anymore. So you're right. It's very interesting looking at the messaging that came from the White House, which was very much it was not as enthusiastic as the messaging that came from the Kremlin. And it's interesting because both are really playing to their own audiences. They're playing to their domestic audience, either here in the US or either
Hmm.
in Russia, with
Hmm.
this messaging based on what sort of their own agendas are, which is something that I think is pretty predictable.
Exactly. And in geopolitics, usually that's how things go.
Mhm.
What you say versus what you do. What you say to the outside world, it's going to be different from your action, shall we say.
Yeah.
But here is the key to all this: we have to take this within the context of the US Russia rivalry, you know,
Mhm.
because this political cat and mouse game, both Russia and the US continue to outmaneuver each other with no end in sight.
Yeah.
And the reason being because the management, because here's my thing: the management of the US Russia relations requires a strategy, a well thought out plan,
Yeah.
tactful diplomacy, and, if I may add, a policy that goes beyond photo ops and exchange of niceties.
Right.
Yeah,
And do
because
you see
because
that?
yeah, just because navigating this such a great power rivalry, it requires that. You
Mhm.
can't do it just over 50, as you the question you put at the beginning. 50-minute call is gonna change the course of history.
Right.
It's unlikely.
Well, and what changes the course of history is
Hmm.
desire, it's intention, right? So
Exactly.
both parties would actually need to have the intention to really come together and work towards something.
Exactly. And this is where that idea of, when I mentioned the tactful diplomacy, what am I referring to here? I'm referring to the idea of maneuvering in the gray area between, because you're going to be both, Russia and the US are both maneuvering between peace and war.
Yeah.
That's basically what it is, because it demonstrates the grasp of the limits of the possibility of building leverage on both ends.
Yeah.
You have to explore the common ground where both countries, Russia and US, can find the common ground of interest to both of them. They have to push back firmly and persistently where they can't. And this is why, as an analyst myself, I see that the path ahead with Russia will get rockier before it gets easier.
Well, and so David, I am very interested. We were talking a little bit in the live stream earlier, and then we were talking about this about NATO and about I think it's there were questions that were asked but not answered. Is that true?
That is true. It's because it becomes the questions of, okay, what is this all about? I mean, when Russia, for example, provided NATO and the US with the 8 key points pertaining to, if you want de-escalate, here are the 8 points that we want answers to. US and NATO never answered.
Right.
So what message are we sending with that to the Russians?
Well, that's a message in its own way that is not necessarily in good faith to not at least provide an answer. But if the US doesn't provide an answer, that doesn't make the US beholden to uphold any promises that were made in those answers. So I think that's very strategic also.
Exactly, but that's going to put the Russians in the corner per se when you start seeing the deployment of NATO troops closer to Russia's border. This is why I believe personally the last 72 hours or so, Russia moved a nuclear submarine into the area. When you move your assets, those are offensive. Those are not defensive weapons, by the way. Those are offensive. What I mean that should you provoke us, we will do whatever we need to do. And Russia made it clear. When you move your nuclear submarines, when you move your nuclear missiles, that becomes very questionable in terms of, okay, NATO is not providing an answer, and Russia has to do what it has to do.
Well, and so, what, in your opinion, why were these submarines moved? Why did it happen?
Because the submarines carry with them is a medium-range nuclear missiles. So that will be an easy, should that red line is crossed, that Russia made it clear that, and the red line is you NATO do not expand your forces near the border of Russia. That's a red line to them. They will not accept. I argued in the book that I wrote about Russia, the dynamics of Russia's geopolitics, that the US and Russia, both countries need to realize their differences first. If not addressed, it could have a major impact on global security.
Yeah.
That's a given, And the United States global agenda and interest will not be advanced accordingly. So, and this is where I see where I put this dynamics, Elizabeth. I put this within the context of US-Russian rivalry.
Yeah.
Because to put this, you have to go back since its inception. It was mainly because when you look at US-Russia relations, we don't use Russia back then, it was Soviet Union. But what was it mainly focused on? It was focused on Europe and Russia's neighborhood. And now it is a bygone era compared to where this rivalry manifested itself. Because we're seeing that rivalry now, not only in that area, we're seeing it in the Middle East, we're seeing it in Latin America, we're seeing it in North Africa. But mainly on the European front, Yeah, I remember when we had the live stream, one of the questions was about the EU. Will the EU
Yeah.
disintegrate?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, here is the thing. On the European front, when it comes down to the Russia-US rivalry, on the European front, Europe is more divided today than it was at any time on how Russia is perceived.
Yeah. Which is very interesting. Can you speak a little bit more about that, because I think that is very important.
More sure, because this division that exists within Europe today than it did a few decades ago. Because I can give you one simple example. We pick a country from Eastern Europe. You pick Hungary, for example. Hungary is kind of changed its course by sort of coming down on freedom of the press, taking harsh measures, for example, against immigrants,
Mhm.
and rolling back on some of the policies that was established in the last few years
Mm.
within the EU. And it's all started when the Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orban, embarked on the policies that provoked and defied the EU. And right there, it tells you how fragmented the EU is. Why? Because Orban is realizing the division that exists in the EU, leading him to move or lean forward towards Russia sooner than later.
Wow, that is very, very interesting.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. You brought up during the live stream
Mhm.
Brexit being sort of the beginning of the EU starting to fall apart. And that happened a little while ago. But do you see Russia as being a big divider of what we're sort of watching happen in the EU?
Yeah. Well, the EU, rather Russia understand those dynamics of those countries,
Mhm.
mainly the one in a neighborhood, and Russia
Right.
can influence their foreign policy. Russia has tools they can use to influence that. Here is what I found very, very interesting. Given the fact I did some research on this topic very, very extensively, what I found very
Yeah.
interesting is that, which is not reported, by the way, in the Western media, especially here in the US, is that doubts within some senators inside the Congress, and mainly on the foreign relations and intelligence committees,
Mhm.
senators they knew full well that Russia will react to any expansion eastward that
Yeah.
excluded Russia, and that the US could not contain Moscow retrograde expansionist impulses.
And that's interesting. So what did they do about it? What did you observe? I mean, they haven't crossed the line, right? But
Not,
they have
yeah,
been inching.
exactly, not yet. But here is the interesting thing. The late, I don't know if some of our viewers will know who he is or not, Richard Holbrooke.
Mm.
Richard Holbrooke was the US envoy to the Balkans at the time. So, and back then, he was President Clinton's special envoy to the Balkans, as I mentioned, dismissed this warning when he wrote in an article, I remember, because I read the article back then that was published in 1998.
Oh, wow.
And if you allow me to quote this, because
Yeah.
I do remember that, he wrote, and I quote, that the US could have its cake and eat it too. Yeah, years,
Okay.
and here's what he says, continuation. Years from now, people will look back at the debate and wonder what all the fuss was about. They will notice that nothing has changed in Russia's relationship with the West. End of quote. Well, guess what I say to the late Holbrooke? I say,
Yeah.
sorry, you were dead wrong. May you rest in peace. Because that's the wrong thinking, that if we are to just expand without taking Russia's security interest into consideration, we are dead wrong.
Well, so by security interest, do you mean their own self-interest?
No, what I mean by security interest is by not expanding NATO near Russia's border,
Right, right, right.
because Russia's border is a red line. That's non-negotiable to the Russians. And we, the West, seems to ignore that fact, like intentionally. We know what that red line is. I mean, how would you feel? Or how we as an American, you and I, as an American, we feel that if we found out that Russians or Iranians or whomever country, Chinese, you name it, they move their submarines, nuclear submarines, to the Gulf of Florida.
Right.
How are you gonna feel about that? Same thing.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
So from a security perspective, that creates problems. Because if you start moving troops, what's next? You're gonna be moving advanced weapons.
Right. And ultimately moving troops is an indicator of distrust. And any relationship built on distrust, and politics is very complicated. So I'm not saying
Indeed.
trust any country. I'm not saying that, but there are very clear sort of advancing moves here, and that those carry messages, right? It's chess. We talk about geopolitics as chess and sometimes checkers if it's not a very sophisticated move. But all of it is chess. All of it is strategic moves.
And that's all it is all about. And the one thing that we don't want to admit is that the Russians are good at the game.
Yeah.
I mean, I recall when I wrote one time about the incident in Georgia. We talked about this before, just to remind our viewers in case they didn't know about it. Georgia was making the same argument that Ukraine is making today. And what they said was, we will challenge the Russians. Okay? Guess what Russia did? Sent the troops, took over in 3 days. Why?
Yeah.
Because Mikhail Saakashvili, the former president of Georgia, miscalculated. He was thinking that the first time a shot will be fired, NATO is going to come to his rescue. Yeah, he got to be crazy. Well, you're going to fight the nuclear Russia?
Yeah.
And he thought that, no, the West is going to come to my rescue. And they did not. I see personally the same. You're right, because he didn't think. And why he didn't think it through? Because he didn't understand Russia's security interests.
Yeah.
Russia will fight for those. I'm a believer that if we, the West, corner Russia, we won't know how they're going to respond.
Yeah. Well, and is it really worth it? Is it really worth it to corner Russia?
The short answer is no. We don't want that. It's because we don't understand the history of that part of the world. Russia, Black Sea to Russia is a choke point. If you block it, you're going to block Russia. They're not going to allow that. They have the means to defend that. And it won't be pretty, the outcome. This is why we're trying to provide our viewers with the big picture so they can understand, because the media in general term, we're not going to just be blaming the West here, because Russia also will put articles that could take away from the content, shall we say, for the viewers to have a better understanding.
Right.
Yeah, because they're going to be thinking in terms of, security means a lot. And when you think in terms of security, you think in terms of access to water. That's one of them,
Right.
And Russia made it clear. And what gives Russia now the question mark, not trusting the West, because they never trusted the West anyway, that when they proposed these 8 talking points, they never received an answer from the West. That's what create now. You can't trust the West with whatever they say. So, and that goes back to our question at the beginning. Can 15-minute phone call change the course of history vis-a-vis the Ukraine crisis? So,
well, what do you think?
I don't see that, Elizabeth. I don't see that happening. Those issues are very complicated. A 15-minute call, no, I ain't gonna cut it. As I said earlier, this is not about just photo ops.
Yeah.
There are strategic matters. There are strategic issues of concerns to Russia that they are not gonna wave away from, no matter what the cost is. The West does not want to accept that reality.
Yeah.
That's what I see the issue is.
I think you're right. And the question of can a 50-minute phone call change the course of history? I think the answer is yes. Did this phone call do that? I think the answer is no.
No. Yeah. The yes part will be if both parties are willing to move forward.
Yeah.
Well, apparently the West is not.
Well, and it's interesting that Putin is the one who requested this call. He's the one who reached out and said, I would like to have this. And you know, like we said earlier, it's strategic, right? Every single move is strategic, but at least the appearance of wanting things to calm down and wanting to work together. You know, I wish, it's my hope, and it's New Year's, and
of course,
you know, so we can put this kind of thing out there. My hope is that we do find some common ground and that there is some kind of peace, because the world has changed. To what you were speaking to earlier with the quote, the world has changed. And I think more than anything, that's what people really want, is peace, and to live a good, happy life, not to keep getting into these, you know, into these conflicts that are, give me your opinion on this, I think perhaps are avoidable.
Well, they are indeed, and it will be nice to start 2022 on that footing, you know, peaceful footing, shall we say. You know, unfortunately, I don't see that happening. It's because geopolitical matters are very, very complicated. Because we're not talking about just borders. We're talking about strategy. We're talking about things that can influence a nation to move one direction or another. That's why the geopolitical issues are very, very complicated. And we try on our channel here to provide a simplified language for our viewers to understand those complex issues in a language that they can relate to, they can understand.
Yeah, and David, you do an amazing job of sort of connecting the dots, because it is very complex, and you know, the geopolitical landscape is almost like a living creature on its own, right? It's not just one country, but it's many countries, and what's happening in one affecting something that a different country that isn't directly related in that situation. And it's very, very complex, and it's got its own life to it in a way. And you do a very good job of explaining
thank you.
Really complex things.
Well, this is why we call the show Geopolitics in Conflict, because the conflict aspects of it is intertwined within the geopolitical realm that we are dealing with. The conflicts are part of it. The question becomes is, can countries that get involved in those conflicts find a peaceful means by which to resolve those issues? That is where the issue is. And from both sides, or any country in the world, it has hawks that push against peaceful directions. Not just here in the US. It's everywhere.
Yeah, and I really like that you brought that up, because it is everywhere. And when, you know, looking at this statement, because the two statements were different, and you know, they weren't wildly different coming from the Kremlin or the White House. They weren't wildly different, but they were different enough to be sending a different message. And so I'm so glad you brought that up, because it does happen in every country. Every country has their own message that they want their own people to hear, and their own message that they want the world to hear.
And that's what we mean. Personally, when I say it all the time, I repeat it. So that's what I always mean when I say in international relations, context matters.
Yes.
That's right there. Because it's all about the context.
It is. Yeah, it is all
that's
about
what I see it. So indeed. So just to go back to, before we wrap it up here, just to go back to that question, no, the answer is no in this case. It's because there is no mutual path for both countries. In other words, both countries are not seeing eye to eye on interest of concerns to both. And that's why a 15-minute call, it's not going to resolve this. You know, it just is going to be another, you know, we send in a text, we send in a message, not a text, a message to the rest of the world that, at least from Russia's perspective, is here. We are reaching out to the West. We are willing. It's now on the West. Put the ball on the West court.
You
The
know
West
what?
on the yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the West, on the other hand, is looking at it from, oh, sure, we will reciprocate, but we're still going to go behind the scenes and funnel weapons through a third party.
So this is my question to you. Do you
Yeah.
think that reaching out from Putin for resolutions to some of these issues, do you think that's genuine?
No, it's not.
Okay.
No,
That's
it's not.
important.
No, it's not. It's not, because he just extending his arm even longer. Why is that? Because the US never responded to his request first.
Yeah.
So that's his way of saying, hey, I'm reaching out again. I'm being the nice guy here.
Yeah.
So it's for not only domestic audience there, but also for here in the US. As I said earlier, when I did the research, I found out that there were senators inside both the foreign relations and the intelligence committees. They were concerned about this NATO expansion eastward, that sooner or later Russia's going to react.
Yeah.
They were voicing these concerns, but we didn't read about them. We didn't hear much about them, but there were concerns inside those two, the foreign relations and the intelligence committees. So,
well, I'm glad that there were concerns that were raised. That's a little bit hopeful, at least, that somebody brought them up.
Yeah, there are some voices of reason inside Washington, believe it or not, despite what you hear. As one who worked there are some voices of reason. It just becomes, just for our viewers to have an understanding, there is a power struggle inside Washington. So,
yeah.
And who controls that power controls the narrative.
Yep.
That's the unfortunate part. So that's what I see. And this is why we wanted to share this with our viewers, just to provide them the real context of what this phone call means, so they can, at least when they hear the news the next 2 days or 3 days or whatever that is, they have at least a background information, so they can at least understand where this is going.
Yeah.
So that is one of the things we wanted to do. Anything to add, Elizabeth?
That's it. Happy New Year's, everyone.
Exactly. Happy New Year's to you. Let's hope, fingers crossed, that 2022 will be the peaceful one that we all strive for. For us, as on our channels, we aiming at doing some new things on our channel that our viewers is going to truly enjoy. There will be a lot of stuff coming up 2022, thanks to you. So we will be doing a lot. So we hope to our viewers, we can't thank you enough for your continued support. So it means a lot to us. So remember to check out our locals at geopolitics.locals.com. There's the website right there at the bottom of the screen. Also, check our membership at geopoliticsinconflict.com. There is, once again, Elizabeth putting up that link over there. As to Twitter, you can follow me at David Walaloo, DOUALALOU, and Elizabeth at Alchemy of E. So, and also Twitter, there's the link there. And also on TikTok and Instagram. So, and by the way, guys, we do have now presence on Rumble.
Yes, we do.
Make sure to check us out over there, and we're gonna be adding more content into that as well. We are working on certain things behind the scenes. As we said earlier, these things take time, and we are only few of us. We don't have a few million of dollars budgets, so that will be a different story. But for now, that's what we're working on. But your support means a lot to us, and we can't thank you enough for this. Hope you find this break-in very interesting, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Till then, stay informed, and as always, till next time. Bye-bye.